So, this is, of course, if you've ever done presentation training, this is the best way to start, by the way. It gets you guys actually laughing a little bit, makes the presenter really, really nervous about their content, and they know their laptop's about to blow up because actually this is a 110 laptop running on 220 power. Let's talk about why we're actually doing this for a second. Forgive me, I have to walk and talk. So, a couple years ago, my wife and I sold our house, and we were talking to our realtor, and our realtor said, you know, it's a really cute house and it's a really cute place and all that kind of stuff, but your front door is, well, ugly. And an ugly front door makes buyers reticent about actually walking in. So if you have an ugly front door, the buyers don't really walk in. If the buyers don't walk in, they don't see your beautiful house, they see the ugly front door and then they kind of go away, which makes selling your house really complicated. So Ralph, who was our realtor, looked at both Beth and I and said, you probably want to just paint the bloody thing and be done with it. So we painted it, had a happy sale, got above asking, we were thrilled. But the reason I actually bring this up is, and you guys write all APIs, right? We all write APIs here, plus or minus. We touch them, play with them, feel them, love them, care for them, nurture them, treat them like our children, perhaps better than our children. Perhaps they treat us better than our children. The reason I bring up this point is actually one very simple, straightforward notion. If you write APIs, chances are you consume APIs. And so how many times have you actually walked up to an organization's front door, their APIs, and said, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. If this is the best face they can actually put on their API, the front door to their organization, do I really want to deal with these folks? Because chances are if there's an API published out there and you can get a service from this organization for whatever it is, and I wrote a few years ago, my big job was to actually create a very API-laden, data-driven thing for the biomedical industry, right? If that thing doesn't look secure, doesn't look structured, doesn't look straightforward, doesn't make you feel like it's actually very, very locked down, doesn't feel in the States for HIPAA compliant, doesn't give you the gestalt of safety and security, you ain't using it, to use bad English. You're not. So what do you think immediately? Stop. I'll go someplace else for this. I don't need to work with these guys. I don't need to work with this API. Let me tell you why I bring this up. This is your front door. If you want to sell your house, make it work. Make it pretty. Make it structured. Make them, because you don't only have one usually, make them kind of work the same. Build some predictability and consistency. Use templates when appropriate, standards when appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we're an open API shop, as you all know probably. We support it like crazy. It's baked into our tooling. But those things are incredibly important as you think about your API strategy. And this is part of the foundation of the talk we're going to have. So when we thought about this a few months ago, I was having dinner with my brother. He's the CIO of a very large French bank. And he sat back and said, you know, it'd probably be a good idea if you showed up because everyone else is going to talk about the more technical nature of these things. And let's be honest, why do you want to be the same person as everyone else? So why don't you come up, you're head of product for an API company, and talk about the product orientation, the business orientation of API development. That's what we're going to chat about for the next little bit, okay? Fair enough? So software is changing. What a shocker. Anybody do ZOS out here? Right? How many times have you actually heard, if you've been around doing development for any more than about 3 or 4 years, that we're just building that for the next 6 months? Anybody ever heard of that before? So I was sitting back at a very large financial institution about 4 years ago, had this exact same conversation, and they said, well, we built it just to run for 6 months. It's now 22 years later. This person's getting ready to retire, and we need to figure out how to transition this stuff. It's not documented. It's not designed visually. We have no idea what the heck is going on with this thing. Oh, by the way, we don't know what other applications it touches. We're really scared. And when Klaus goes away, we don't know what to do. Can you help us clone Klaus? That was the fundamental ask. But the reason I kind of bring this up for just a moment for your consideration is to say APIs have a life to them. And they are never as long or as short as we think they are. They have a life. It will be a long one again or a short one. We don't know right now. But the thing in my mind is to always treat it like it's going to be around for a while. So hacking something together, hacking in the weird, the vernacular term, not the white hat, black hat kind of terminology, is probably not the best idea, whether those APIs are going to be inbound or outbound. Again, go back to the front door metaphor, right? This is your best face, in theory. This is your front door. And if you want to say, come on in, make it work right, okay? And we'll talk about that more. So as a product person, I tend to think about three things. Now, I could take a long time and talk about strategy at a very high level, and we could have a McKinsey-esque or pick your favorite strategy consulting house discussion about how strategy converts into tactics, then becomes operational. And oh, by the way, if anybody talks to you about vision, strategy, and tactics and those kind of things and doesn't actually figure out and help you translate how to take that stuff and put it into operation, start questioning what's going on. Because vision and strategy with an operational appreciation is a really tough thing to kind of nail down. Right? We have to actually start making those connections, which is what we'll talk about for the next few minutes. So product people in general talk about what, why, and when. And so for my developers, who I talk to every day, I'll talk to them a couple hours actually because we have an office in Stockholm, and we're going to actually go have an open chat literally today. The what, why, and when is incredibly critical. Because what you really want to do is figure out, all right, what is this I'm going to try to build? What's going on? What's the value to the client? Where are we going to drive revenue? Where are we not going to drive revenue? What's the business model underneath this thing? Why? What's the orientation? What are the goals? What are we trying to get done? Right? What are we trying to get out of this? Critical questions as well. And again, this is a 20-minute presentation, so kind of do this quick. But these are questions you should be thinking about and asking your people, your POs and your PMs, et cetera, and your business leads and whatnot. And then when? When is critical? We'll talk about this in a moment, but when is a really critical question because it's all about, do you have a very small opportunity in the marketplace? Is the window into the market small, or is it gigantic? Is the window of opportunity for a particular client very small or a particular vertical? Do you have a set of banking regulations that are going to be popping up in 24 months? That's your window, right? Your clients want to be done probably 12, 18 months before that, or at least approaching, right? So you want to think about that timing as well. So these three things together are questions that you should be asking as you think about what the requirements are, right? What stories we're going to be populating, et cetera. What's that backlog look like, right? This is what you want to understand. Without this context, I would offer to you all that it's very, very hard to actually go off and construct a piece of code, forget an API, any single line of code. What's the context that we're building under is really the question that you try to understand. And then from there, one of my colleagues earlier talked about empathy. And I want to just take this a step further because I think this is really critical. As I look for new people, as I look for staffing, as I look to actually bring on product owners and product managers into my organization and at other organizations I've been at, so I've been doing this for about 25 years or so. I actually started a mainframe operations guy way back when and then transitioned because I thought the software was terrible and then started building software and figured out, well, it's terrible because it's really hard to build. So my goal became I'm going to build better software for all of us because I hated what I had to work with. And what became clear is over that multi-decade journey that you really need a few things here. And this is things I know you folks have because you build software and there's no way to do it without actually having these skills. I just put these as a reminder to all of us that we have to be mindful of who we're building stuff for. Why are we building that stuff, right? We have to be tenacious. Software is hard, right? I love the fact that a friend of mine over drinks about a year ago said, you got an easy job. He was in the gas and pipeline business. And he said, we don't have to worry about regulation. You don't have to worry about building stuff. You don't have to worry about deploying stuff. You don't have to worry about freezing and heating and all that jazz. You just write a bunch of code and then pretty happy dancing things show up. As we all know, that's an absurd statement, but I also offer that building pipelines is really hard as well. But tenacity is incredibly important, right? GSD is an American term, I think, but you probably all know it as well, but it's about getting stuff done. It's not about just talking for talking's sake, right? This is about how do we take that and translate that thinking, right, into action and activity. How do we make sure that, again, back to the earlier point, how do we make sure the activity is oriented toward the right set of problems? And then to do this, you need a team attitude and team orientation. Two slightly different things, and we may actually be able to kind of circle back on that in a few minutes. Continuous improvement is incredibly important, right? How do we get better all the time? I would offer one of the tenets of Agile. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Pattern recognition, incredibly important. And really, this is the thing, though. At the end of the day, and one of the most crucial things you will actually be thinking about, back to that what, why, when, what, et cetera, thing that we talked about earlier, is deciding what you're going to do and deciding what you are not going to do, right? Corner cases, edge cases, et cetera. What's our focus? What's the order? When are we going to deliver what? Right? That's the orientation you need to have. Corner and edge cases are incredibly important, incredibly critical to a lot of clients, et cetera. But let's make sure we got the core thing working first. And then you have to think about that delivery structure and delivery time frame. So, now let's go back to the front door. We'll keep going back to that as a theme throughout this discussion. This has become my favorite hot button over the last couple of years because I'm firmly convinced that we differentiate through good design. Anybody work with a poorly, I should say, design product? Come on. Come on, raise the hands for Pete's sake. I know I have all the time. This is why I got into this business, right? You would actually work with stuff that irregularly popped alerts or irregularly didn't pop an alert or sat back and gave you an error message that hadn't been coded well, and you have no idea what the heck the software is trying to tell you. Other than, yeah, something's not working. Well, that's really cool. A little root cause analysis, please. Point me at where the problem is. That would be lovely. But this is critical. This is the differentiator. And go back to that front door analogy, right? How do we make sure that the experience makes sense for the people that are actually trying to use your software? If your API is your front door, where's the knob? Does it work? Is it grabbable? Is it in a place that makes sense? Fair enough? So, let's transition to the next step of this, which is know your customer. And this is incredibly critical because at the end of it all, and we talked about empathy a few minutes ago and also a little bit during the last session, know your customer, know the personas that you're actually building for. It will only make the software you build better, dramatically better, in fact. Because software that we build for a systems analyst is incredibly different than software that we build for a trader. Anybody disagree? Right? So understand the persona that you're building for is incredibly critical. And if your POs and PMs aren't giving that to you, push back. Say, hey, I really need this information because this is really going to help me understand how these design mock-ups are going to happen, how we actually put ourselves into these people's shoes, how we build a better product, how we build a better business, right? It also helps downstream if you're a software house like we are, right? It helps marketing market, helps sales sale, and just as importantly, I should offer as well, it helps support, especially, understand what the customer is kind of going through and how to actually help them work through their problem as well. So it's not just about the fact that you've got a persona, it's sitting on a catalog someplace, and you kind of reference it every once in a while. You say, yeah, that's okay, we're going to go on. This is a living, breathing thing, and these should be updated on a regular basis as you have more conversations with the clients. And oh, by the way, if you're building personas and thinking about building personas that are based on an abstract thing where you go to Google and go, hi, Google, I would love to have a persona for a 45-year-old systems administrator. You can do that, actually. If you want, go do that now. You'll find a few. They will make absolutely no sense to your business. The only way to do this well is to actually, I don't know, talk to a client every once in a while. Again, who's your user? Who's your client? What are they paying you for? What are they doing with your stuff? Make sense so far? Okay. Okay. We're now going to transition to something that I also think is important as we think about the business of APIs, which is think about what are we metricing? What are we following? What are our KPIs? What's important from a data perspective? What data are we gathering? What data do we need to gather? What external data should we be looking at to better understand how these things are being used in the wild? To better understand how we get the best information from them, to better understand how we make the systems more performant, to better understand how we actually deliver the value that our clients really want to deliver. And again, going back to the business of the API, if you will, there's no way to understand this without actually kind of putting numbers to it. The old adage of if you can't really kind of put a number on the thing, if you can't put a metric on it, if you can't measure it, it's hard to manage it is true, as you all know. Right? So as you sit back and think about how we're going to actually deploy all these things, whether it's just raw performance, raw numbers of hits, do we monetize off of this? Is every login, if you will, something that's a monetizable moment? How does this tie back into the business model? This is about how we actually synchronize. If you remember earlier in the conversation, we talked about that strategy to tactics to operational stuff. This is how you tie the things together. This data will enable you to understand, am I really doing what I want to do from a performance perspective? Am I really hitting the strategy that we have in place? Am I really delivering the value that my business needs? And oh, by the way, on top of that, and more importantly, am I delivering the value that my clients are expecting? You don't know that, you don't understand that unless you're going to have thousands of conversations with the marketplace and your clients, or you have the proxy, which are these metrics, which are tightly constructed, monitored with a fairly regular basis, and understood by everybody that's actually working on the software. It's really hard for these metrics to actually make a difference and make sense to you all without actually you understanding what they're trying to tell you and what they're being used for. And it's a regular part of the conversation I have with my team all the time, right? What is the strategy, why, when, what, et cetera? What are the KPIs? So that we all know where we are. Because the only way this works is if we actually have a team, and the only way the team understands what's going on, if you want to use a football analogy, American-style football or non-American-style football as well, you have to know what the score is. Did you score a goal? Or didn't you? The defense may or may not know that. They typically do. But actually, it's hard to score a goal without, understand if you're winning or losing if you don't have the metrics in place. Make sense? Fair enough? Okay. This is a shot of I think it's a 3D rendering, of a bullet train, the next generation bullet trains that are coming out in Japan as we speak. One of my favorite shots, actually. We have talked a great deal about UX now. We've talked about the strategy portions. We talked about the what, when, and why, nexus, et cetera. And it's now time to kind of transition to one of my favorite things in the world, speed. Speed is critical. Speed is important. Any one of you actually want to move more slowly. Any one of the organizations that you work for want to actually move more slowly. I didn't think so. It is hard to get this level of speed without a few things, right? For trains, it's about making sure the track is right, making sure that the pilings that the track is actually secured to are firmly embedded into real bedrock, if you will. It's hard to make sure without the metal going through stress testing and what have you, meeting a bunch of standards. It's hard if the tunnels aren't wide enough or poorly or well written, without the electricity coming in, being at the right and consistent voltage, et cetera, right? There's a whole bunch of factors to do this. A Ferrari is a great fast car. A Ferrari driving through Boston, as I've done once in my life, because I had a friend that actually had one, is the most horrific experience you've ever had, because the only thing you're actually going to happen to you in Boston is you're going to drive at 8 miles an hour, which will cause the car to overheat. You will hit one pothole causing $18,000 of damage that your friend will look at you and say, what on earth are you doing to my car, man? It is impossible to reach those speeds on little traffic areas in greater Boston, at least. And I can say the same thing for pretty much every metropolitan area in the country, on the planet, right? With the exception of some areas in Germany and Italy and Austria and a few other places. But they're very small. But why can you do that? Why on those sections of the Autobahn are you allowed to drive without a speed limit? The roads are fabulous. They're straight. They're like glass. You're having a happy moment, right? You sit down, and I've done this once in my life, rented a Porsche, went to the Porsche Museum, planted myself in the Autobahn. For the American, this is an amazing experience, and drove on glass for a few hours at absurd speeds, which I should not have been able to do. The reason that you can move that fast is because the roads are great, driving an incredible car, you got great tires, et cetera. There are a whole bunch of preconditions around being able to go at speed. So you want speed in your organization, right? You do. You want speed. Well, you've got to put the enablers in place. You've got to get a really, really good highway in place. You've got to get really good train tracks in place. You've got to get really good structure in place to enable you to go at those high velocities. All right, so how do we do that? So I'm not an Agilist. I'm not an Agile purist whatsoever. I'm not here to actually preach you the gospel of Agile. I kind of don't care. As every one of the engineers I've ever worked with in my life will tell you, including the guys on the mainframe, I just look at my development team and say, look, I want a process. I don't care what it is. I want to understand what it is. I want to understand how we do continuous improvement with it. I want to understand some metrics. I want to make sure that you understand my requirements. I want to make sure that we iterate. I want to make sure that we have an open and collaborative environment, et cetera. So I don't care if that's Agile. I don't care if it's waterfall. I don't care if we use thumbtacks and pieces of string. It doesn't really matter. But the fact that we have a process is incredibly critical, right? Agile's great because it allows you to move faster, in my humble opinion. I'm going to talk about that, why, in just a moment. But let's talk about structure for a second, okay? So we go back to that whole notion of, and this is where I start tying the presentation together a little bit. This is where we talk about strategy as it goes down to tactics and how we operationalize, right? So the reason Agile is interesting in this way is it kind of has the same structure, right? You've got themes that translate down into initiatives, that translate down to epics, that translate down into workable chunks or stories, and we can get bigger or smaller depending on which Agile structure you follow, et cetera. But there's a very structured understanding about how we actually think about stuff from 1 to N. Okay? All right. So why are we talking about this? Well, let's actually get into an example. So we actually step back and, again, talk about strategy. So one of the strategies for my products actually I joined the organization about 7 or 8 months ago, and I initially looked at one of our products, and Ready API, in fact. SOAP UI Pro is the actual name. And I said, this looks a little clunky. I'm out of time. So I'm going to close up in just a minute here, if that's okay. This is all about making sure that your strategy ties down into your tactics, which are exactly the chunks in your roadmap, right? Your epics, down into your stories, and then we work to actually balance all the stories across all the streams, right? And this is the what, when, why thing when we actually start shifting around the roadmap and stories and opportunities based on the changing business dynamics. And really quickly, what I'm just going to walk through, and then I'll kind of leave you with this last thought, is to say, look, the incredibly important thing about Agile, and the last thought I'll leave you with as we close up here, is that what we want to make sure of as we go through this cycle, that when we think about how we do project initiation and then continuous delivery and testing and then work through the final delivery of it all, is that this process is a continuous improvement process and that we're getting better all the time. And again, that's all enabled by the fact that we've tied together the strategy, the operation, the tactics to what we're building, why we're building it, when we're building it, and when we're going to deploy it. And I was going to take a second and talk about marketing and a few other things. You've heard that in other sessions. I'm happy to have a conversation about this afterwards. Thank you so much for your time.